There is a question that has followed humanity since the first stories were told around firelight. What happens when we lose control of who we are? Every culture, in every era, has wrestled with this fear, and nearly all of them have created stories to explore it. Stories about people who change, who becomes something else, something they cannot stop, something they do not recognize. The werewolf legend is one of the oldest answers to that question. But here is what I want you to understand before we go any further. This video is not about monsters. Not really. It is about us. About the parts of ourselves we do not want to acknowledge, the impulses we suppress, the shame we carry in silence, the fear that one day we might become the very thing we despise. Transformation myths exist because being human is complicated. We are capable of tremendous kindness and tremendous cruelty. We build families and communities, and we also destroy them. We love people and we hurt them. Sometimes in the same breath. The werewolf is a mirror, a way of asking what lives inside me that I cannot control, and what happens if it gets out. That is what we are exploring today. Not the creature itself, but the meaning behind it, the fear, the identity, the transformation. In this video, I want to understand why the werewolf legend has persisted across centuries and cultures, and what it reveals about the psychology we all share. So settle in. Let this be a slow, thoughtful journey. Because the best stories are not the ones that shock us. They are the ones that make us understand something true about ourselves. The werewolf legend appears in almost every corner of the world. In ancient Greece, there was the story of Lycaon, a king who served human flesh to the god Zeus and was punished by being transformed into a wolf. His name gave us the word lycanthropy, the clinical term for the belief that one can become a wolf. In Norse mythology, warriors called the Ulfhednar were said to channel the spirit of wolves in battle, losing themselves to a primal rage that made them unstoppable and unrecognizable. Across medieval Europe, werewolf trials were nearly as common as witch trials. People were tortured, executed, and burned for confessing, often under duress, that they had made pacts with the devil and transformed into beasts under the full moon. In parts of Africa, there are legends of hyena people. In South America, jaguar shifters. In Asia, fox spirits and tiger men. The creature changes depending on what predator a culture fears most, but the core idea remains the same. A person. Becoming something else. Losing the self. Now, why does this theme repeat so consistently across time and geography? Because it speaks to something universal in the human experience. We all know what it feels like to lose control, to say something in anger that we did not mean, to act on an impulse we later regret, to look back at a moment and think, that was not me, that was not who I want to be. The werewolf externalizes that experience. It gives shape to the shapeless fear that we are not entirely in command of our own nature. And there is something else worth noting. In many of these legends, the transformation is not chosen. It is inflicted. A curse, a bite, a punishment from the gods. This is important because it reflects a deeper anxiety. The fear that we might become dangerous through no fault of our own. That violence or darkness might be inherited or triggered by circumstances beyond our control. That we might carry something inside us, something dormant, that could awaken at any time. Psychologists have studied this for decades. The werewolf legend maps almost perfectly onto what we now call dissociation, the experience of feeling disconnected from one's actions or identity. It also mirrors the shame cycles that accompany addiction, trauma responses, and disorders of impulse control. People who struggle with these conditions often describe a sense of becoming someone else, of watching themselves do things they do not want to do, of waking up, metaphorically, and having to face the damage they caused while they were gone. The wolf is not the monster. The loss of self is the monster. The transformation is a metaphor for the terrifying experience of not knowing who you are anymore. And that is why these stories persist. Not because we believe in literal shapeshifters, but because we recognize the emotional truth beneath the fantasy. We are all afraid of the wolf inside. Now I want to share a story with you. This is not a historical account. It is a narrative, a piece of folklore in the older sense of the word. A story meant to illustrate a truth rather than document an event. I am telling it to you this because I believe it captures everything we have been discussing. The fear, the shame, the desperate struggle to remain human when something inside you is pulling you toward something else. Listen carefully, not for the horror, but for the meaning. There was a man named Elias Harrow who lived at the edge of a village called Thornfeld. Thornfeld was a quiet place, nestled in a valley where the winters came early and stayed long. The people there were farmers and shepherds, simple folk who kept to themselves and trusted the rhythms of the land. They feared the forest that bordered their fields, not because of wolves, though wolves did live there, but because of older stories. Stories their grandparents had whispered. Stories about people who went into those woods and came back changed, or did not come back at all. Elias was the village carpenter. He had inherited the trade from his father, and his father before that. He was good with his hands, patient, precise, the kind of man who could look at a broken chair and see exactly how to make it whole again. He was also quiet, reserved. He had friends, but he kept them at a careful distance. He had a sister named Maren, who lived in the village proper, and he visited her once a week for supper. He had a reputation for honesty and fair dealing. People respected him. But Elias carried something that no one in Thornfeld knew about. When he was 17 years old, he had killed a man. It had happened during a journey to a neighboring town. A stranger had tried to rob him on the road, and Elias had fought back. In the struggle, his knife had found the man's throat. It had been self-defense. He told himself that for years. But the memory never left him. The weight of the body, the heat of the blood, the way the man's eyes had gone empty. Elias had buried the body and never spoken of it. He had returned to Thornfeld and built his life as if nothing had happened. But at night, in his dreams, he was still standing on that road, still watching the light leave a stranger's eyes, still feeling that terrible, shameful thrill of power. He had taken a life. And some part of him, a part he refused to acknowledge, had not hated it. This was the secret Elias carried. This was the wolf that already lived inside him, long before the forest gave it a form. The night everything changed began with a scream. Elias was in his workshop, sanding the legs of a table, when he heard it, high and sharp, coming from the direction of the sheep pastures. He grabbed a lantern and ran. By the time he reached the field, 3 other men had already arrived. They stood in a loose circle, torches raised, staring at something on the ground. It was a sheep, or what remained of one. The animal had been torn apart with a violence that seemed almost deliberate. Its entrails were scattered across the grass. Its head was turned at an unnatural angle. "Wolf," said Aldrich, the village blacksmith. His voice was flat, certain. But Elias was not so sure. He had seen wolf kills before. They were efficient, purposeful. This was something else. This was rage. Over the following nights, more sheep were killed, then a goat. Then a dog wandered too close to the tree line. The village grew fearful. Men began patrolling in pairs. Mothers kept their children inside after dark. Elias joined the patrols. He told himself it was his duty. But the truth was more complicated. He felt drawn to the forest in a way he could not explain. The darkness between the trees seemed to whisper to him, to call him closer. On the 7th night, he went alone. He did not tell anyone. He simply walked into the woods with his lantern and his knife, and the irrational certainty that he would find what everyone else was looking for. And he did. The creature appeared without warning. One moment, the forest was silent. The next, it was there, standing between two oaks, watching him with eyes that reflected the lantern light like molten gold. It was not a wolf, not entirely. It stood on two legs, hunched and massive, its body covered in coarse black fur. Its hands, if they could be called hands, ended in claws longer than Elias's fingers, and its face, though elongated, into a snout, held something disturbingly human in its expression. Elias did not run. He could not. He stood frozen as the creature lunged. He remembered very little of the attack, a blow that sent him spinning, claws raking across his shoulder. Teeth grazed his arm before he managed to drive his knife into the creature's side. It howled, a sound that was half animal, half scream, and fled into the darkness. Elias lay on the forest floor, bleeding, staring up at the canopy of branches above him. The stars were visible through the gaps. They seemed very far away. He should have died. The wounds were deep, but somehow he managed to drag himself back to the village. Somehow he made it to Marin's door. She found him collapsed on her threshold, pale and barely breathing. "What happened?" she whispered, pulling him inside. "I found it," Elias said. "I found the thing in the forest." He did not tell her that it had found him too, that its blood was on his knife, and its mark was now on his body. Let me pause here for a moment. Notice what is happening to Elias. He is not transformed yet. He does not even know what the wound will do to him, but the change has already begun. Internally. He sought out the creature. He was drawn to the darkness even before it touched him. This is one of the most important elements of transformation stories. The curse does not create something new. It awakens something that was already there. Elias carried violence inside him long before the beast's claws ever touched his skin. The wound simply gave that violence permission to emerge. This is what makes the werewolf legend so psychologically resonant. It is not about an external monster invading an innocent person. It is about the collision between who we want to be and who we fear we already are. Now, let us continue. The wounds healed faster than they should have. Within 3 days, the gashes on Elias's shoulder had closed into pale scars. Within a week, they were barely visible. Marin called it a miracle. Elias said nothing. But other things were changing too. His senses sharpened. He could hear conversations from across the village square. He could smell the bread baking in the inn from his workshop. At night, his vision in the darkness became almost as clear as in daylight, and his dreams grew worse. Every night he ran through the forest, not as himself, but as something else, something low to the ground and powerful, driven by a hunger that had no name. He tore into flesh. He tasted blood. And when he woke, his sheets were soaked with sweat, and his jaw ached as though he had been clenching it for hours. He told himself it was nothing, just fever dreams, after effects of the attack. But then came the night of the full moon. He was sitting in his workshop, carving a handle for a tool, when the pain began. It started in his shoulder, right where the creature had clawed him, and spread outward like fire through his veins. He dropped the knife. stumbled toward the door. The world tilted. The edges of his vision went dark, and then he was somewhere else, not physically. His body was still in the workshop, but his mind had retreated to a small, quiet place deep inside himself, a place where he could only watch, helpless, as something else took control. He felt his body changing, but the sensations came to him muffled and distant, as though they were happening to someone else. The man he had been was shrinking, folding inward, becoming a passenger in his own skin. He tried to scream, but what came out was a howl. The creature that had been Elias Harrow burst through the workshop door and ran into the night. He woke at dawn, naked and shivering, in a creek bed 3 miles from the village. His body was covered in dirt and dried blood. Some of it was his own, from where his transformation had torn his skin. But some of it, he looked at his hands. His fingernails were crusted with something dark. He followed the creek back toward Thornfeld, moving slowly, dreading what he would find. The sheep pen on the eastern edge of the village had been destroyed. The fence was splintered. Inside, 4 sheep lay dead. Elias stared at the carnage, at the marks in the dirt, at the claw gouges in the wooden posts. He had done this. He knew it with a certainty that made him want to vomit. He stumbled home, locked himself inside, and did not come out for 3 days. Elias tried to control it. He read every book in the village that mentioned wolves or curses or transformations. He found almost nothing useful, just fragments of old stories, warnings to stay away from the forest, prayers to saints whose names he did not recognize. He tried restraining himself. On the nights when he felt the change coming, he would chain himself to the heavy workbench in his shop. He would wrap his wrists in rope. He would pray, though he had never been a religious man, that the bonds would hold. They never did. Every full moon, the creature emerged. And every dawn, Elias woke somewhere in the forest or the fields, surrounded by evidence of what he had done in the darkness. He killed more sheep, a cow, a wild deer that he found half devoured beside a stream, but no people. Not yet. And Elias clung to that fact like a drowning man clings to driftwood. As long as he had not taken a human life, as long as the wolf had not crossed that line, he could still believe that some part of him remained in control, that he was still, underneath it all, a man. I want to stop here and acknowledge something. If you have ever struggled with addiction, with anger, with trauma that changed how you respond to the world, you may recognize what Elias is going through. Not the literal transformation, of course, but the cycle. The desperate attempts to contain something that feels bigger than your willpower. The rituals you create to protect yourself and others. The way you wake up after an episode and have to face what you did while you were not yourself. People who have lived through this often describe the same dissociation Elias experiences. The sense of watching from inside as someone else makes decisions with your body. The shame that follows. The isolation that comes from believing no one could understand what you are going through. The werewolf legend gives language to experiences that are difficult to articulate. That is part of why it endures. It names a kind of suffering that many people carry in silence. Elias is not a monster. He is a man who has lost control and who is terrified of what that means. This is the heart of the werewolf's tragedy. Notice that Elias is not fighting a monster that exists outside of him. He is fighting himself. The wolf is not a separate entity that has possessed him. It is an expression of his own capacity for violence, his own hunger, his own buried rage, and the chains he uses to restrain himself are not really about physical restraint. They are about the desperate hope that willpower alone can overcome nature, that if he just tries hard enough, he can prevent himself from becoming the thing he fears. But here is the difficult truth these legends teach us. You cannot defeat the wolf by denying it exists. You can only make peace with it by acknowledging what it is, and choosing, consciously and deliberately, not to let it rule you. Elias has not learned that lesson yet. He is still trying to contain the wolf through force, and force, as we are about to see, is not enough. The breaking point came on an autumn night when the harvest moon hung low and orange over Thornfeld. Elias had chained himself as usual. He had locked the workshop door. He had even asked Maren to check on him at dawn, without explaining why. But this time, the transformation came earlier than expected. This time, the wolf was stronger. The chains snapped, the door splintered, and the creature that had been Elias burst into the night with a hunger more intense than anything it had felt before. It ran toward the village. Elias did not remember what happened next. He experienced it in fragments, flashes of image and sensation that came back to him later, like shards of a broken mirror. Running through the streets, the smell of wood smoke and cooking meat, a door opening, a woman's scream, and then a child's face. Young, terrified, frozen in the doorway of a cottage. The wolf lunged, but something stopped it. In the fraction of a second before its claws struck flesh, Elias, the real Elias, the man buried somewhere inside the beast, surged forward. He threw himself against the walls of his own mind. He screamed without a voice. He refused. The wolf's claws stopped inches from the child's face. For one terrible, trembling moment, man and beast fought for control. The wolf howled with frustrated hunger. Elias held on with everything he had. And then he turned and ran. He ran until his legs gave out, until the transformation released him and he collapsed, naked and weeping, in a ditch at the edge of the forest. He had not killed the child. He had stopped himself. But he had come so close, so impossibly, terrifyingly close. Elias did not return to Thornfeld. He could not. The village would never be safe as long as he lived near it. And he could not trust himself, could not guarantee that the next time his will would be strong enough to stop the wolf. He left a letter for Maren. It explained nothing and everything. "I am sick," he wrote, "a sickness that cannot be cured. I must go somewhere far away, where I cannot hurt anyone. Do not look for me. Do not follow. Just know that I love you, and that leaving is the only way I can protect you." He traveled north, toward the mountains. He found a cave high above the tree line, where the nights were cold, and the nearest village was 2 days' walk away. And there, alone, he began the slow work of understanding what he had become. He did not try to cure himself. He had given up on that hope. But he learned to recognize the signs of the coming transformation. He learned to prepare, to isolate himself, to ride out the change in places where no one could be harmed. And slowly, over months and years, he learned something else. The wolf was not his enemy. It was part of him. It had always been part of him. The rage, the violence, the hunger. The curse had not created those things. It had only given them form. And just as he could not destroy the wolf, he could not let it rule him either. The only path forward was to acknowledge both sides of his nature, the man who built and repaired, and the beast who destroyed, and to choose every day which one would guide his actions. It was not a victory. It was a negotiation, a lifelong practice of restraint, awareness, and deliberate choice. But it was enough. This is where Elias's story ends, not with a dramatic cure, not with a final battle against the beast, but with a quiet resolution, a man learning to live with the wolf inside him rather than being consumed by it. And I think that is why the werewolf legend endures, because it is not really about monsters. It is about the parts of ourselves we cannot control, the impulses we fear, the shame we carry for the things we have done, or the things we are capable of doing. Every one of us has a wolf inside. It might be anger, addiction, fear, grief. It might be the echo of a trauma we never processed, or the weight of a choice we cannot undo. And the lesson of these stories is not that the wolf can be killed. It cannot. It is part of us, woven into the same fabric as our kindness and our love. The lesson is that we can choose. Every day, in every moment, we can choose which part of ourselves will lead. Elias did not defeat his wolf. He learned to live alongside it. He learned that transformation is not something that happens to us once. It is something we navigate constantly. We are always becoming, always changing, always choosing who we want to be. That is the true meaning of the werewolf legend. It is a story about identity, about the fear of losing ourselves, and about the hard, ongoing work of remaining human in a world that sometimes makes that very difficult. So the next time you hear a story about someone who transforms, who becomes something they do not recognize, I hope you will listen differently. Do not listen for the monster. Listen for the human being underneath. Listen for the fear, the shame, the desperate hope that they can still be saved. Because that is where the truth lives. Not in the fangs and the claws, but in the quiet struggle that happens before the change. We are all capable of transformation, for better or for worse. What matters is what we choose to do with that capacity. The wolf is real. It lives in all of us, but so does the person who can stop it. Thank you for spending this time with me. If these ideas resonated with you, if this story made you think about your own nature in a new way, I hope you will carry that reflection with you. Until next time.